that's one of the things I would say even is being humble about things, right? And always be curious and not judgmental, like Walt Whitman says, and learn and take things in all the time, because you'd be amazed if you'd be quiet and just listen what you can pick up.
Oh, yeah. I got a former Division I athlete with a PhD quoting Walt Whitman. I just wanted to make sure that I had that right. Okay.
Oil and gas makes modern life possible. The energy the world requires today and tomorrow will come from decisions made in the oil field today. Oil and gas will remain the leading source of fuel to power affordable energy that is sustainable for the billions of people that depend on the success of the industry. The oil field is a group of people, companies, technologies, and institutions working towards providing the world with safe, clean, storable, and transportable power. The Oilfield 360 podcast is a 360-degree deep dive into the leaders of the industry, who will provide listeners with a first-hand account of what it takes to build, maintain, and lead the energy business into the future. The Oilfield 360 podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: Lockton Global Energy and Marine, uncommonly independent. Lockton is the world's largest privately owned insurance broker and risk finance advisor. Lockton's global energy expertise is centered in Houston and represents the largest concentration of energy specialists, clients, and experiential knowledge in the upstream, midstream, and downstream segments of the oil and gas industry. Visit Lockton.com for more information. Upright Digital. Upright Digital specializes in partnering with your business to maximize marketing efficiencies. We have a deep understanding of people, their needs, motivations, behaviors, as well as the technologies that enable brands in many industries to utilize what is available in a changing digital landscape. Find us online at uprightdigital.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Oilfield 360. We're back from a few days away, and I'm joined this morning by my good friend Jim Wicklund, co-host extraordinaire. Jim, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fabulous, actually. It's the prettiest day in Houston I've seen in a very long time, and I've gotten to go quail hunting this season more than ever in my life, so I'm just a happy guy.
Well, if you... as one of my former business partners used to say, that if you're looking for sympathy, you can find the dictionary between shit and syphilis. I think it's fantastic. You've had a phenomenal bird year.
Thank you.
How have the quail numbers been?
Bad.
Yeah.
They've been down. We landed at the Falfurrias Airport, and there was only one other plane there. In the middle of quail season, I've never seen that. So it's a slow year. But being on the back of a quail truck, watching dogs work on a beautiful day, it kind of beats being in the office.
Yeah. It's kind of like being on a boat when the fish aren't biting. It's still better than being in the office.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, what are they saying about the quails?
They have no clue for the 43rd year in a row and predicting why there aren't enough quail.
Yeah. I think quail are like women. We don't really know anything.
Well, we actually did spend trying to learn something about them. The U.S. government gave a grant of $2.5 million to see if quail would breed more actively while on cocaine.
Really?
That's actually the truth. I don't actually know the outcome of the grant study, though, but I'm going to look into that.
Yeah. As a former chairman of Quail Unlimited back in the day, I'd be very interested to hear about that one. Well, nobody wants to hear about us talk about quail, particularly if the quail have not been as populous this year. So maybe we should introduce our first guest we have this morning.
Excellent idea.
So everybody, thank you for joining us. We are joined by a friend and somebody I've been wanting to get on for a while, Dr. Ryan Ezell of Flotek. And Ryan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, I appreciate it. I'm really happy to be here this morning. I've been looking forward to it and excited as we kicked off this new year in 2024.
Absolutely.
That and your kids think you're a stud because you're on a podcast.
They do. They were all excited. Of course, my oldest was trying to figure out why in the world I'd have an opportunity like that, but he's always giving me a hard time.
He doesn't know how famous Dad really is.
Yeah, he's quite the character. He gives me a hard time all the time. So.
Now, how many kids do you have now?
I have 4.
Holy.
I have a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old. So, needless to say, when I'm not working, I'm pretty busy at the house.
Yeah.
You could say.
After this podcast, Ryan, I'll take you aside and explain to you how this works so you can stop doing this.
Well, it is quite funny because my wife and I had that conversation when we figured out about number 4, and we addressed that issue.
Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. So, Ron, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you came from and how you got in the business. Obviously, it's going to be pretty interesting to be a PhD with 4 kids and running a company.
And in his spare time,
Yeah, in his spare time.
What is your hobby? Just as a curious question.
I still quite active in a lot of competitive athletics, and I do a lot of hunting and fishing. So, I think that takes up most of my time. I help coach baseball and stuff with my kids, practice with them, and do a lot of whitetail deer hunting still.
You're leaving it to sleep when you're dead, right?
That's correct. I figure I usually, my day starts at 3:45 in the morning, and I usually get to bed by about 9. So I'm a pretty tight schedule. And one thing I've learned here, in the last few years is how to really prioritize and make use of valuable time.
Yeah.
I would think so.
No doubt.
I found it's better to get started early than later.
I'm a morning guy, 100%. I love it. I'm a straight morning guy. So.
Well, we appreciate you joining us this morning. So tell us a little bit about your past. Tell us where you're from.
Well, it's a funny story. I'm actually from a very small rural town in southwest Mississippi, a little town called Summit. It's probably in between Jackson, Mississippi, and New Orleans, Louisiana, right there on the Mississippi-Louisiana line.
My mother went to Chattawa.
So my parents' house and where I grew up is about 15 minutes from Chattawa.
And both my parents were born and buried in Macomb.
Really?
3 of the kids were born in Macomb.
Wow. And
my siblings.
We're from the Lake Dixie Springs community, which
I know.
Yeah. And we live on a lake and grew up I kept a house there for a long time, and then sold it back probably about 2015 or so. But I get back there quite a bit. But definitely a small town. We have one red light, starts blinking at 10 o'clock at night. I come from a very, I would say humble family. My dad, he's 73 years old. He's never even been on a plane. So, when I look at, I think a lot of that drove.
Congratulate him. I think that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, he was an engineer. He worked for Energy for about 45 years before he retired. And my mom was a banker for 50 plus years. She retired from senior vice president at Regions Bank, and at all their multitude of changes from AmSouth, deposit guarantee, Regions, et cetera.
Senior banker and engineer, so you didn't have a genetic head start at all, did you?
Not at all. No expectation. So, but no, I from there, I always growing up, I had a pursuit to be a physician.
Yep.
And so when I went to undergraduate, I had a great opportunity. I played Division I football, so went on athletic scholarship to University of Central Florida. I left UCF my senior year, but I actually graduated from Millsaps College in Jackson, a private
where
school.
my mother graduated from.
Yeah, and I would consider Millsaps to be a pretty elite school. It's very difficult, transferring and getting caught up on hours. I graduated from there with the sole intent of going to medical school. And believe it or not, I worked for Dr. Ruth Frederick. She was head of neurology at River Oaks and at UMC. She was on the board to get into med school. I was accepted into medical school, and right when we were getting ready to start in August, there's something happened in my life that I had a change, and decided I didn't want to be a practicing physician. I always wanted to be an ER physician, and there was an incident happened when I was shadowing a physician that changed my thought on did I want to do that for the rest of my life. And I had a conversation with Dr. Fredericks, and she basically, told me, she said, those things happen, you'll get used to it. But in my mind, being a physician is something really special. Your heart has to be in there. Your patients need you to be 100% in that all the time. And if you have any doubts, you probably shouldn't do it.
What happened?
So I was shadowing a doctor named David Smith, one of the great ER physicians in Mississippi, and there was actually a car wreck, and it was a van had hit an 18-wheeler head on, and on a major highway. The mother and two of the children were DOA at the scene, and two of the other children had severe brain trauma, and they were bringing them to the hospital. I went with David to help triage, and then the dad had to come to the hospital with the only child that wasn't injured, and he was at a baseball game. And these children were in really bad shape. We couldn't really do anything with that rural hospital. We were life flighting 2 helicopters from Jackson to come down and get them, but they were staggered about 45 minutes apart. And we went in there, and Davis sat down with 2 highway patrol. They were telling about the rest of his family what had happened, and Dave was giving him the status of the 2 kids that were there. And basically, when it all came down, he said, look, they're in really bad shape. We're going to do our best to get them to the emergency room at UMC. And the man leaned over and grabbed David by the hand, and he said, I trust you'll do the best thing you can to maintain what I have left in my family. So David and I got up, and I was talking to him when we left, and he made a decision. He picked a child that was in the best shape to put on the first helicopter, and took it. That child, we got to the hospital. They addressed it. She was in a coma for about 3 weeks, but survived. The other child died as we were loading him onto their helicopter, the second helicopter. If we had flipped it around, we'd have lost both of them.
Yep.
And I walked out of the hospital like, man, because he had to go back in there and tell him about the other child and kind of where it was. And, and I walked out and I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do that all the time or not. Because my whole life.
Trauma ER, yeah.
Yeah, is what I wanted to do. And I was like, I just don't know if I want to do this. So I had doubts about it. And so I decided not to pursue that. Dr. Fredericks helped me out. She called a colleague of hers, Dr. Charles McCormick, who has water-soluble polymer drug delivery research at Southern Miss. Southern Miss's industrial polymer science program is one of the best in the world.
It is.
And she and Dr. McCormick went to Millsaps together. And because she had won the Founders Medal at Millsaps, and
Wow.
she was a brilliant lady.
Yeah.
And so Dr. McCormick brought me down, put me on a full stipend based on my MCAT score. I hadn't even taken the GRE yet, and it was the promise of I'd take the GRE. And so I came down to Southern Miss and got in their PhD program there. And so the rest was kind of history from that point. We got into doing advanced drug delivery research for Genzyme Pharmaceuticals, a lot of things, and then 9/11 hit. And when 9/11 hit, you would not believe the amount of DOD and DARPA funding that came to material science program for stealth coatings, weapons development, advanced robotics, all those different things that we were doing there. And believe it or not, the things that we were doing for Genzyme works phenomenally at weapons applications for friction reducers, for advanced torpedoes, plastics, and different components.
Yeah, okay. I hadn't thought about that.
So my career evolved into heading up some DARPA and DOD grants. And I spent a short time doing some defense contracting work out of graduate school when I finished my PhD. And most of my dissertation is written around stimuli responsive polymers for drag reduction. And what was unique about those is we were putting layered torpedo firing solutions to where the torpedoes would go 30% faster and thus 30% further. So you can imagine if you've ever seen The Hunt for Red October, their timing for whenever they fire, well, they're going faster than they realize, and they go further. And so they gave us a little bit of an advantage. And post all that, fast forward, I was in D.C. Speaking at a ACS convention around these, controlled polymerizations and different things that we were doing to make these coatings. And a gentleman walked up to him, this brilliant guy that I met. His name was Ian Robb. And Ian was a technology fellow for Halliburton. And he asked me, and he passed away. He had cancer. Right. And he came up to me and he said, "Have you ever thought about working in the oil and gas business?" And I said, "Well, I'm from South Mississippi." I said, "So 70% of the people I know
I work in oil
and gas business." I said, including my grandfather and my uncles. I'm very familiar with it. And he said, "I would love for you to, interview with us. We're looking to beef up our R&D programs at Halliburton. And we're looking for some, bright guys that got some field experience and get out and do some things." And so I agreed, and I flew to Houston, and the first person I met was Jeff Miller. And I had an opportunity to interview, present the work we had done. And At that time, Jeff was being brought in to be the vice president of Baroid Drilling Fluids.
Okay.
So instead of going into production enhancement for friction reducers and slick water development, they pulled me into Baroid, and I worked directly for Jeff in Baroid. And that's how my career in the
And what year was that?
That was in 2005.
Okay.
And that's how everything got kicked off. And so I started there, ran research and development. We did about 51 patents for Halliburton in the drilling fluids and completions and slick water and all the different components. And then I had, I was lucky. I was identified as a high potential employee inside Halliburton, and so I got to kind of go under a mentorship with Jeff. And I'd meet with him periodically, and I came in his office one day and I asked him directly. I've been working for about a year. I said, "How do I get the position you're in right now?" And he sat back in his chair and he undid his tie and he said, "Well, let's talk about that for a minute." And he said, "If you really want to do that, we'll put you on a path to do that." He said, "But the first thing is you got to go be a mud engineer." And so I went to mud school and with a PhD and went out in the field, ran mud and HTHP.
I have never seen a PhD doing mud in the field, and I've been doing this for a while. We did a podcast with Jeff last year. That was just fascinating, and I've gotten to know Jeff in a couple of different ways.
We've got PhDs, Jim, but we just got different kind of PhDs.
Different.
We got those posthole digger PhDs.
Well, what was great about Jeff is Jeff's got the kind of the cowboy background, and I mean he and I hit it off really well.
He went to college on a rodeo scholarship.
Yeah. And he's great down to earth, and I mean.
But I've seen him in tights from wrestling in high school at St. Mark's. He looks better in a cowboy hat. I'm just saying.
But you couldn't imagine working with a better group of guys that I was brought into oil and gas with. I had multiple, almost 13, 14 years international experience. I got to work with Mike Hugentobler, Joe Rainey, a lot of those awesome guys over there in Eastern Hemisphere.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. We passed off some of this up way too fast for me. Okay, so you played Division I at UCF. Mm-hmm. What position?
So I was a linebacker, outside linebacker.
Oh, so you were mean too. Okay.
Yeah, what they call an edge nowadays, right? Yeah. But I came to find out that what I thought was fast was different in Florida. And so I made I took advantage of, some relatively average intellect that I had, and I said, let me see if I can play offense because it running plays in different pieces. And so I was like a round peg fitting in to play tight end, at 6'5", 270 pounds.
I was going to say you're a little short, I thought when I.
But hey, but it worked out really well playing tight end for me, and I enjoyed it. Got school paid for, and got to travel all over the U.S. to play in some big stadiums.
So you actually played and graduated.
I did on time.
Wow, that puts you in a rarefied atmosphere.
Well, the crazy, I had a year eligibility because I got redshirted my freshman year. Most linemen, get a redshirt year, and I played in 4 games my freshman year, but still had a redshirt. And
you didn't offer to play at Millsaps?
Well, I played 1 year there.
Did you really?
Yeah, and I was a flashy guy at Millsaps coming in. I played both ways. So
that's cool.
I played our a defensive end on pass rushing downs. And then, made all conference at tight end, and I had an opportunity to play in the NFL. What was interesting, my sister cheered at Southern Miss when Brett Favre was there, and Bus Cook, who was Brett Favre's agent, I caught passes Brett used to throw to us at Southern during camps, and I spoke to him about doing it, and he said, I would use that brain for something else besides ramming people, and go on with it. So I didn't.
Hard to argue it, at this point.
It is, but it's exciting. Look, I'm telling you, I remember the first Division I college game I had, we were playing at Nebraska. They were defending national champions. And I remember we came out, and that was on the old AstroTurf.
Yeah.
And when their kickoff team came out and the guy raised his hands, the crowd got so loud, the ball fell off the tee. The ground was shaking. And I was like, I'm looking right now, I got chill bumps thinking about it. It was like the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And we played Ole Miss, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Nebraska, all of them that first year. So it was awesome. It was a good time.
That's fabulous.
Yeah,
now, I have a little bit of trivia for you. Do you know that Starkville, Mississippi had the first Ralph Lauren outlet store in the country?
I did not know that.
Everybody thinks of Ole Miss as being preppy. Starkville beat that one. I thought that was pretty good.
It's interesting, too, because when you look at Mississippi, people always ask me about it. I said, well, you got Mississippi State, which is like Texas A&M. You got Ole Miss, which is like Texas.
Right.
I was like, and then you have some, Southern Miss is like your Texas Tech kind of thing, right? And it's a great place. I mean, but I would have never bet on that having the first outlet Ralph Lauren place at Starkville.
Franklin Myers is a graduate. Shout out to Franklin. There's a Mississippi Mafia, Mary Bass and some other people here in Houston.
Yeah.
That includes all of us.
Well, in the Woodlands, you go up, there used to be a little sports grill kind of up by my house. Every Saturday, it was bombarded with Mississippi State people. And, they come in and watch the games together. They have a good alumni presence up in this area.
Wow.
Tim Duncan's a Mississippi State guy.
That's right.
I've got a lot of family from Mississippi, fond memories of the state of Mississippi.
My father wouldn't let me go to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
He said it was a party school. Cause
it is.
He played football, and that's where he graduated from.
Really? Yeah. Okay.
Both my parents went to Ole Miss, and my dad was known as Budman, apparently, in school. But
I decided not to party, so I went to Southern Methodist.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, if you get an opportunity, I actually took some customers to see Texas A&M and Ole Miss play this year, just to take somebody to the Grove. I mean, the Grove is a unique place.
It is.
It's very unique. And
It's
something good to go see at least once, at Ole Miss.
I've got a black lab from Oxford, Bet. She's one of those, Wild Rose dogs.
Okay.
And that's a neat kennel. Well, it's fascinating. You and I've got a lot in common. I had a lot in common with Jeff, with rodeo and all that. But my Dr. Fredericks was Dr. Kim Dunn. And I got to see the business side of medicine that most people do, and coming from a family of doctors. And grandfather was a physician in Mississippi who was killed by a drunk driver, actually delivered. We just honored him the other day at the Bear Bryant Awards dinner in Houston. Peyton Manning, Archie Manning. My grandfather delivered Archie Manning in this world. But anyways.
I have Archie Manning's chin strap from the 1969 Liberty Bowl. I was in about the 9th grade, and I got out on the field because I had a giant rebel flag. And back then, you'd run out and get the chin strap from your hero, because that's what you could take home. And I was the first one to make it to Archie.
No kidding.
Yeah, and then 50 years later, when I had my picture taken with him in an SMU deal, I told him I'd been stalking him all these years.
Well, that's a great family. But anyways, Jim and I, you gotta keep us on track here. We'll divert occasionally. So fascinating. You worked with Jeff. Did you get a love for wing shooting like Jeff has?
Probably not nearly that caliber.
Yeah.
No, and I was always, I think the majority of my career, I had the luxury of working the Eastern Hemisphere for a lot of my tenure, and which was great because you got, for me growing up in South Mississippi, it was like a blessing. I got to see the whole world and see things that you would have. I still go home and I tell people about things that I've seen and been able to do, and it's almost like they don't believe it. Right?
So list us where you've lived.
Yeah. So my first assignment was in Iraq, and so I would stay in Dubai for a week and then go into Basra for 2. Well, that was when we first starting that business up. Then I moved into the Eastern Province in Saudi, lived in Dhahran.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for a couple of years. Left there, ran out. That's where I got my first real operations cut-in. Was in the Middle East. And every time I talked to Jeff about one of these, he said, at some point in your career, Ryan, you're going to have to ask somebody to go. And he said, it's a lot easier if you've been there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next time I moved to the startup deepwater operations we had in East Africa. So I covered Djibouti to Cape Town, living out of Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam.
Oh, nice. You're on the right side.
And that was for 2.5 years. And then I took over the west side. I moved to Luanda and was in Angola for a few years and ran the DRC, Angola, Namibia, and the other side.
What year were you in Rwanda?
Right when the downturn hit in 2015.
Okay.
I got there. There was 37 deepwater rigs drilling, and it rolled into 16. There was like 7.
Yeah. And
it was a tough time in Rwanda back then. And then I had an opportunity. Mike Hugeltolber, I started working for him in the Eastern Hemisphere at that point. He was a senior vice president of the ESA region.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took over as the ESA region manager for Baroid drilling fluids, and then we combined regions. So I had ESA and Eurasia, which was awesome. I remember he said, "I need you to." Mike called me. Him and Joe were there, and they were like, "Hey, I need you to go on a little road trip and learn the area." So I left on January the 3rd. I got back in March. By the time I went everywhere, let me tell you, going to Siberia and Sakhalin Island in January, not real wise.
Not fun.
You know, it's pretty brutal, especially when the plane gets iced up and you have to take that long train back. But it was awesome. I mean, like, it was
in hindsight, it was an adventure, right?
It was a learning experience of a lifetime.
Did they use vodka on the de-icing on that?
A little bit of that and a little bit of polyethylene.
More vodka.
But I'm sorry, polyethylene glycol. So it was, which you don't want any animals around from that stuff because, you know, pretty toxic. But it was amazing. I mean, and it was constantly, you know, you were getting to work with IOCs, the independents, the national oil companies, dealing with unions, joint ventures, deep water, tough land jobs, new market entries, fix and exit countries. It was just, I mean, it's a learning experience of a lifetime. And, you know, and I always had my reservations, like I wouldn't do that because my uncles and some of them would always go 28. And I was like, I'd never do that. Let me tell you, it was some of the best time of my life. And I always, you know, one of the things I'd always tell people is, don't be scared to step out of the door and take that chance, because you'll get to see and do things that'll change your life and give you a totally different perspective. And the one thing it does do is when you come back home and you see the things that go on these days here in the U.S., you're just like, man.
Roll your eyes.
Yeah, like, I mean, we have, like, really not that bad of problems, and we bicker over stuff comparison to what you see in some other areas, you know.
When I went to work for Western Geophysical, I'd never been out of the country except maybe across the border at Tijuana with my family when I was 9. And the first thing I did was talk myself into an overseas assignment. And I spent the next 15 years working as a geophysicist engineer almost exclusively overseas, and lived different places, you know, London, Singapore, Australia, different places. And you never get rich. There's two types of geoscientists: the ones who stay home and work for Amoco and then quit and go drill the prospects they always wanted to that Amoco wouldn't drill, and they get rich. And then there's guys like us from Mississippi who have never been anywhere, and we decide we want to see the world. We get to see the world, but we never get rich. But in terms of experiences, and I agree that you'd go home and tell people what the trip was like, and what some of these places are like, and you read the paper and you realize that people just have so little perspective. Only 14% of Americans have a passport and have been outside of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. 28% total have passports, but 14% have been outside of those areas, and that's it. Yep. And I think that's sad.
Yeah, I believe it. I you know, and that again, it was a blessing. You know, a lot of my friends, my family, you know, my dad, he never could understand it. My dad's always had a chip on his shoulder for me not being a physician, and I love him to death. A million good things about me I get from my dad. The OCD nature, the follow through, the finish what you start, all the different components, and but he never understood why in the world I would go do those things. And you know, looking back, and even my wife, that she moved, we got married after I'd moved back from the Middle East, and so she made sight unseen straight to Tanzania, Angola, everywhere. And I mean,
tough woman. I like that.
She's a trooper, and she's.
How did she enjoy that?
She loved it.
Yeah,
because I first did some HTHP work with Chevron in Thailand, and I was over there working while we were dating, and I said, hey, and she had just gotten a passport, and she had been to like Cozumel or somewhere. Right?
Yeah,
and I said, hey, you want to come see me in Thailand? She's like, send me a ticket. And so she came all the way around the world. I sent security to go get her at the airport in Bangkok, and she stayed 2 weeks with me in Bangkok. And while I was working, she was out with a friend of mine who was a country manager there, his wife. They went around, and they would send me pictures from, like, ruins. They were down at, you know, feeding the monkeys and doing whatever else you could think about, riding elephants and all kind of stuff. I mean, she'll get out and go.
That's fun girl. I like that.
And she's, you know, she's from Southeast Texas. She's from Silsbee, right north of Beaumont.
Yeah.
You know, so she is a character, and she's always been the background of the things I've done really well. I'll say that.
The only oil field I ever personally directed was involved with the discovery was an onshore field in Thailand, the Bung Ya oil field.
Was it high temperature?
No.
What?
No, but it wasn't a very good oil field, but we found it and produced it. And so I had to go. I spent probably, without living there, I spent more time in Thailand than any place else. So I can imagine how much I didn't get to do all the touristy stuff your wife did, but it's a fascinating country, and I congratulate you for being married to a woman who's got that kind of spirit.
But you know, it got to a point though, when kids got to a certain age, it got really difficult. Our once we had two, my oldest son, it was a little easier. You know, he grew up in Africa. And
what a great childhood.
God,
you know,
no kidding.
he's got more stamps in his passport than most adults. And he's always like, Dad, when are we getting on a plane and going somewhere kind of kid, right? That's the one that gives me a hard time about being on the podcast, right?
Yeah.
He's a character. And but whenever you look back, once we started to have two,
Yeah.
I was on the road 300 days out of the year. It started getting really difficult.
Doesn't work.
You know, really difficult. And, you know, it kind of, that's where you look at evolutionary steps in your career at that point, things you can do to be around.
So when did you leave Halliburton?
I would have been in 2019 and came over to
Okay, and
Flotek.
how many kids did you have at that point?
2.
That was when you had 2. Okay.
2. I had 2, and then we had 2 more since I've been at Flotek.
Yeah.
You know, I thought we were done at 2, honestly. And we had 2 boys, and then my wife wanted to try for a girl, and then we had one. And we thought we were done. And I was sitting in the playroom at the house one day with the kids, and she comes in there and she's holding one of the tests. And she's like, I've never seen it turn this fast before. I was like, what? So here's number 4. And but as you know, I believe it like this: is the Lord doesn't put tasks on you that you can't handle, and you stay focused. And it's just one more step of just being organized, right, and prioritize the time. That's one of the biggest things in comparison to the roles like I have now. Is time's extremely valuable, and you got to make sure that you're allocating the proper amount of time to certain things, and it becomes extremely important.
I have to remind you of a Boudreaux Clotilde joke about friction reducers and children.
I think I got some of that with me if you need some.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like that might be one of those, that Bob Saget joke that gets worse and worse and worse as you go.
yes. I remember those.
You know, the interesting part when I was at Southern Miss is the actual the gentleman. So that was on my dissertation committee. Dr. Robert Lockhead actually invented KY jelly and all those different things too.
No
lubricants, kidding. Yeah. And Dr. Charles Hull invented the stealth coating that's on the B-52, the bombers, the stealth bombers.
Wow.
There. And there's a lot of cool folks at Southern Miss back then.
You know, Southern Miss, Auburn University, there are a couple other universities that are in the South that have some unique research and development and relationships with the DoD and DARPA, et cetera.
That's right.
Matter of fact, the inside of the Pentagon is painted from a low VOC content paint developed at Southern Miss.
Really?
Not everybody would know that.
I was there when it was developed. It was amazing. Yeah. When they first started this, the DARPA things, there was a guy named Craig Halker. He was the chief technical officer at IBM, came there. And I remember, this is when you know you're supposed to take a step change in research, when these guys come in and they start talking about stuff. And he put up his first slide he put up there, it showed a 50-cent piece, one of those JFK 50-cent pieces, and had a black square that's about half the size of that 50-cent piece. This was in 2001. And he goes, anybody know what this is? And we're like, a microchip, didn't know what it was. He said, this is a 10 terabyte hard drive. In 2010, I bought my first 1 terabyte hard drive, and it was big as a VCR.
Yeah. It looked like a suitcase.
That was in 2001, where the technology was and how it slowly gets out to the public versus what they had
Then.
So you can imagine where it potentially is.
You
now.
got to play with some fun stuff, man.
Yeah, that's some really cool things. And the stuff that goes on down at Stennis is really cool. They do all kind of, I would say things around aeronautics and jet propulsion and all kind of cool stuff down there. It's pretty neat.
But you're right. It's interesting how some schools develop, that, and some don't. I got a friend at Alabama, but you're dead right on that.
In schools that you wouldn't think would have the, you go, oh yeah, that'd be something MIT would do or Berkeley or whatever. But no, Southern Miss, Auburn University.
Our joint with Genzyme Pharmaceuticals, the joint research group was Dr. George Whitesides at Harvard. And so we had a meeting once a quarter with them. So, it gives you the caliber and link between what they do over there. It's pretty amazing. So.
And they play football, so it's
That's questionable here and there. Back in the 90s when what's the coach, Jeff, was there, they won like 5 or 6 conference championships in a row. They were phenomenal. Darius Thomas that played for the Ravens, it was outside linebacker, played for the Patriots, got like 3 Super Bowls, was a defensive end back then. And but they fell off for a bit, and now they're trying to get back up.
A million years ago, you took our coach, Bobby Collins, after he left SMU, after the debacle.
You know, some of the most fun people in this world are from southern Mississippi. Do you know that?
And some of the best-looking women, I don't mean to be sexist here, it's the weirdest thing. Mississippi has produced more Miss Americas than anybody but maybe Texas. And I don't know if it's in the water or something, but you walk through the campus at Ole Miss or Southern Miss. I don't know about Mississippi State so much, but it's something in the water. They're amazing people.
Well, and per capita on the athletes, if you look at NFL players per total head count of the state, they're 1 or number 2 in the country. But you look at Jerry Rice, Brett Favre, Walter Payton, Cooper Carlisle, a guy from my hometown, 13 years, first team All-Pro lineman. I mean, there's tons of them. They're all over the place. Even when I came out of high school, from when I was in, say, coming into high school in the 9th grade to when I graduated, there's about 17 guys went to NFL from Macomb Summit area. 17.
I remember.
And you walk around.
My father never let me forget. Yeah.
You know, I'm like an average size guy around there. I mean, my buddies will come home. I'll have friends that, you know, particularly I've had some guys from overseas that I got to know will come back to my camp on the river in Mississippi, and they see all my friends. They're like, everybody's 6'5", 6'6". I got another buddy of mine, Ernie. He's like 6'7", 350. I mean, they're just big guys.
Yeah.
And, you know, pretty good athletes, most of them.
So talk to us about your education, your experiences, both in graduate school and Halliburton, and how that is being utilized at Flotek today. Tell us a little bit about Flotek as well.
Yeah, you know, it's they're 100% directly related. I can say this is that, you know, I had a unique opportunity in that what I actually did in graduate school applied directly to what I had an opportunity to build my career on at Halliburton. So when I got there, I mean, the polymer applications and drilling fluids, completion fluids, and frac fluids was just, you know, it was a plethora of things we could do. So we got into evolving, you know, like I say, 50-plus patents on multitude of things that, you know, at one point in time we had commercial looking at it. It had generated about $10 billion in revenue on just 6 of the patents that we had, you know, advanced drilling fluids and stuff like that. So it was great. But the part that really evolved in the career was actually getting into the business acumen component to it, because intellectual property is great, but it's great only when it either protects other IP or it generates revenue and profits, right? That becomes what's the ROI on the things you're doing? So you learn a lot about, you know, the R&D process and matching it to business opportunities globally and understanding that process to get it maximized. That's where, you know, the big parts of innovation come around. And so I had a great opportunity. You know, the big red machine is a great thing to learn how to do that, right? How they funnel those things in and how they deploy that. More importantly, how they invest in training in their people. I had a phenomenal opportunity to go through this Texas A&M program there, including the Presidential Leadership Excellence Program, which, you know, you essentially earn almost like an EMBA along the way and learn how to pick up the business acumen along the way. And then I would say the opportunities to go to fix and exit countries, new market entries, resurrecting the brand in certain areas, all those led to honing skills that were perfect for the opportunity at Flotek.
And those usually aren't skills well developed in PhD chemists and engineers, with no offense. I was a geophysicist. You don't see a whole lot of, you know, CEOs running around the oil business who are geophysicists. That's just not, they don't learn the business side of things. Seismic industry is a great example. Yeah. So I think that's interesting that you cared, and the opportunity you got to learn was fabulous.
Well, yeah, it was. You know, and I credit some really good leadership guys that I was around to see, you know, talking with Joe Ranning's like a legend, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And to have the real conversations, I had the opportunity. He would pick the phone up as I was a coming up guy in Eastern and call me and ask me how things were going, and I'd talk to him about stuff, and he would say, I wouldn't spend too much time on that. I'd focus on this, or I would do these things, and they give you that little nudge along the way. And he would throw you in the water deep enough to see how good you could swim just before you go under. They pop you right back up, right, and help you out. And you can't read that kind of experience in books. You get to go out there and learn it yourself. And so it was a great thing. And and I was lucky enough. I had a well supported career inside that organization. And to this day, you hear me talk about it, I have so much respect for that organization. And I had this opportunity at Flotek. Well, back in 2000, when I was still in R&D at Halliburton, Flotek's evolution of its surfactant nanotechnology, the renewable resource terpenes and the dipentines they were putting to enhance reservoir performance, all those things were coming into the market. And Halliburton, they were a big user of that technology.
Right.
I actually helped bring that into the company. We tested it. We put it in drilling fluids. We did a lot of things. I even had some joint intellectual property. So I was aware of Flotek for almost 15 years, what their technology was, how it worked. And then along the way, the business evolved, and and there were some strategic steps potentially. They just got into a little bit of difficulties, in terms of the way the business was performing. And so, a recruiter approached me about the opportunity to come to Flotek. I looked at the numbers, and they'd been on a skid of revenue and losing EBITDA performance, et cetera. But I was like, my whole career had been trying to rebuild programs like that, and I knew the core DNA of that organization was good around innovation and technology, and as chemistry being a common value creation platform there.
Well put, yeah.
And so the hole that was in my resume was, everybody had always said, well, you've done it inside of Halliburton. It's got cash. It's got support. You've got a big shield.
It's your second job.
Yeah. And so could you do it without all that? Could you go in there and, resurrect an organization? Could you deploy a strategy under the stress? Could you rebuild a brand? Could you do those things? And, that stuff attracted me like a magnet. And so knowing what I was getting into, came over, and it's been quite a ride, and I think that, Jim, you and I have talked throughout most of the ride, right?
Yes.
And I think, we've got that organization going in a solid, direction, and rebuilding the brand, the service delivery components, how we balance contracts, et cetera. But all those things are directly related to, what I've been doing for 20 plus years in the past. And it was amazing how they tie together. It was amazing to me even how much, how the business design of moving drilling fluids looks like what we do on the completion side. It's a logistics game, right? And can you bring the innovation, and can you make evolutionary technology changes along the way while you're looking for that revolutionary piece on here on the outside, and focus on service quality and safety, and
instead of just developing a product, it's everything having to do with the development of the project, including the people that make it.
That's right.
And the HR concerns.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a much broader envelope as a president of a company than anything you could do on a division level.
That's right.
Because on a division level or region or whatever, you always have someone to pass it up to. And when you're the president, it stops at you, as they say.
Well, and the great part about it is, and I would say the learning curve came because there was the aspect of running the business, like all the things we're talking about now, which were stuff I felt prepared, very comfortable at doing. And as I evolved from being a senior vice president at Flotek to president of just a chemistry, then chief operating officer, then president of the company, now CEO, I had to learn about investor relations, shareholder communications.
I'm sorry.
And the expectations on all that. And, how I go talk to a customer is totally not the same with how I talk to creation of shareholder value and what we're doing from that aspect. And particularly, shareholders who may or may not be familiar with the industry and different components. So it was an accelerated evolution.
Trial by fire.
Years. That's right. And, I would think it was definitely about direction and not perfection, and I would say.
Well, that's well put.
And, but I think, it's been an exciting time. And I honestly have enjoyed every second of it. And whether I'm a sadist or what, I just like the stress. So it's been good.
So talk to us about some of the things y'all are doing to differentiate what people know from Flotek's past to what y'all are doing today.
I look at it as, let's start fundamentally. The company itself, the approach, again, I'll say it again, is around chemistry is a common value creation platform. And what we saw were with Flotek, I would say from about 2017, 2018 to when we came on board at the end of 2019 was there was a little bit of brand destruction. We had some service quality issues, and you guys know you have a few of those in some big basins like the Permian Basin. They're hard to recover.
Word gets fast, yeah.
They're hard to recover.
Yeah.
There was also our ability. If you look at the evolution of how completions went from, say, 2012 to 2022, the guys at Liberty did a great study when they showed how the engineering changed, the cost changed, and how you did the disintermediation of the chemistry from the pumping, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And I was saying 17, when slick water really came on, 17 or 18, Flotek took a right when it should have took a left in terms of understanding how we could deliver that process and the cost structure to do that, and being able to move friction reducers and some of the other small molecule chemistries that complement the proprietary technology we have around reservoir improvement with our complex nanofluids. And so we had to kind of repair a little bit of brand damage, a little bit of relationship damages on the service quality side, and we had to restructure this organization to where we could cost effectively deliver the bread and butter chemistry that's complemented by what we do really well, which is the surfactants, clay controls, scale inhibitors, and stuff that really improve the overall return on investment out of that asset. And so, that we put together a 5-year strategy about how to do that. And I would say, it coming out of COVID, it hit the bottom. And, we had gotten down to, it was pretty painful because we only had basically at that point in time 2 customers that represented 90% of the revenue. And if they had an off week, we had an off quarter.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But, you look at where we are now, we have an even split between E&P operators and service companies. We don't have a single customer that represents more than 8% of the revenue. We're extremely much more diversified. We're in every basin. We took millions of dollars of costs out of the operation. And it's just fundamental blocking and tackling, setting KPIs and goals out there, what success looks like, and pushing through it, right?
You say it's really simple. It's easy. I don't understand. Anybody could do it, except virtually nobody could have done it. I have to say, you stepped into into an interesting and challenging situation. I think it's more masochism than sadism, but we can discuss that. But I love your attitude of that's all you have to do, and it's easy. Realizing how exceptionally difficult that is.
Well, and again, I think it comes to we get used to the cyclical nature of oil and gas and the pains of doing it. And, I think it was one of those things where we were at the bottom. We had to come up, and honestly, along the way, we've had the opportunity. We had some great talent come into the organization. Guys that I had worked, the management team that we've got there now are guys we went out and recruited and brought in. They're phenomenal. And look, and when I came over, one of the reasons that I came over was that I was going to get to work on the operations solely, and John Gibson came in as a CEO at the time, kind of in between when I took over CEO, and John did a great job of getting air coverage for us to let us do the things that we had to do to fix the business. And I'll tell you, John did some phenomenal things in coaching and exposing me to a multitude of things that I hadn't had the opportunity to see before, and in terms with the board, investor relations, and he took me along to do a lot of those things. My first road shows, and at that point in time, nobody's really interested in the story because the numbers didn't look that well, but the interest is kind of come back now. So it's been a good trip. I've enjoyed it.
I love John, and I consider him a very good friend, and he's been a good friend for years. Being mentored by John Gibson has to be one of the more interesting things I can imagine somebody ever doing.
We John and I share a couple of things really in common. John's a sharp guy.
He's brilliant.
He's super intelligent. We share our faith together, and that gives us some common platforms to talk about a lot of things outside of work. And we like to hunt and fish, and so we had a lot of good things like that. Now, the way that we look at technical execution varies a little bit, but that's okay because he was teaching me more of an abstract look holistically while I was so focused in on like nailing down the flawless execution component, right? Yeah. And then he would always give me these little projects to bring me out of my comfort zone and put some ambiguity in it and do those different things, which he loves ambiguity.
Yes, he does.
And but it was great, and he and I to this day we text every now and then, we check up on each other. And
Jeff Miller and John Gibson and Rainey, you've had a great bunch of educators along the way.
And I'll say that again. I'll throw Mike Hugentobler in there. Mike Hugentobler he had a landmark background, but Mike ran ESA, Sub-Saharan Africa. He ran the Middle East, Asia Pac, and Mike was phenomenal.
I remember Mike from Landmark.
He's super intelligent.
When I first met John, he was president of Landmark.
Yeah. And all those guys are great. There's Mark Richard and Shannon Slocum, and I worked directly for Eric Carre. He was a VP of payroll
Eric,
too.
Yeah.
All those guys, great guys.
A solid group, Eric and Mark.
Yeah, the really cool part is that while you worked and learned from them, now you are one of them. Congratulations.
I feel very honored to be in that.
And you should.
I feel honored to be.
But it's really cool that you are.
It's and again, I saw we were at the national championship game down at NRG, for the Washington Michigan deal, and we had some customers there, and I walked down and went to the Halliburton suite and saw Mark and talked to Mark for about 30 minutes, and I walked in there and was just like I had never left, knew everybody in there, and it's great, and you always can learn stuff from it. And that's one of the things I would say even is being humble about things, right? And always be curious and not judgmental, like Walt Whitman says, and learn and take things in all the time, because you'd be amazed if you'd be quiet and just listen what you can pick up.
Oh, yeah. I got a former Division I athlete with a PhD quoting Walt Whitman. I just wanted to make sure that I had that right. Okay.
He's fun to talk to.
You are an exceptionally interesting and diverse guy, I have to tell you.
So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing, though, to differentiate the business a little bit, and some of the investments y'all have made as it relates to technology, to the extent you want to. So
I'll start this out. One of the themes that we've talked about at Flotek since I brought our management team in and stuff is I stick to the movie Moneyball. Have y'all seen Moneyball with about Billy Beane?
Fabulous.
And I've got probably 20 presentations with that Moneyball sign on it and Mickey Mantle's initial quote. It's amazing what you don't know about the game you've been playing all your life.
Yeah.
And so, when we talk about ways that we differentiate is, when you look at, Flotek's DNA, chemistry's value creation, we've been doing green technology, green scorecards, all the stuff that everybody's been throwing out in the press,
You've been doing.
We've been doing for a decade and a half. So we consider that table stakes of what we do every day. And so we definitely got a differentiator there. We've got 170 intellectual property patents around those types of technologies. But what we've really tried to focus on is how do we create a handshake between total cost of ownership and environmental cost of ownership? Because make no mistake about it, energy is required globally. Every single activity that we do requires energy. And the various, forms of energy or whatever you do are all going to have some type of environmental impact. So how can we utilize chemistry to create the most sustainable and responsible way to provide energy security for the globe? And I mean, that's the way we kind of look at business, the way that we innovate. And I love the things like that Chris Wright gets. I mean, Chris Wright has got this thing down, and we talk about energy transition. I think of it more as energy diversification. It's like an accordion. It's always going to flex. You look at this past winter storm, if you look at ERCOT, oil and gas provide 90% of the energy.
Yep.
Renewable, these sustainable things, we need them. But we have to understand there's a gap that's going to always expand and close. And we have to figure out a way to make those work in symbiosis and some type of harmony. And that's where we come in to play, is that, I think we fundamentally have a unique engineering approach to chemistry. We acquired a company called JP3. Because to me, one of the things I learned in the past was if you wanted to improve your chemistry, how do you monitor it faster and evolve it faster? And your approach to using data to do that becomes extremely important. And so as we brought JP3 in, we looked at it as two aspects. How do we utilize spectroscopy, which would be near infrared, Raman, different components to advance how we look at things that are flowing in the pipeline, coming out of the well, the chemistry that goes down hole. How do we really optimize that component to where not only are we putting the right chemistry down hole that gives you the best return on that investment, but we're doing it at the lowest amount of chemistry required, and then we're monitoring the compositional changes that come out to where we can look at production chemistry, what goes into refineries, transmix, read vapor pressure measurements that have impacts on volume and different mixing and refined fuels. So we've really evolved in that aspect around what we want to do. And in my mind, when you start combining those, you look at a company that's not a commodity chemistry company. We're bringing some advanced looks. That's better for the EBITDA multiples, for shareholders, et cetera. But, we've gone out and studied our wells. And since 2021, I picked 2021 mainly because it was where we changed the strategy of how we did the delivery and the prescriptive chemistry management, et cetera. But it's also where you start looking at where the engineering changes kind of got uniform across the basins, right? Yeah. And from then till 2023, in almost every basin where we do our full prescriptive analytics, put our chemistry in play, we've got our engineers on site, we see on average 26 to 32% better flow out of the first 24 months than off-site wells where we're not used.
That's material as heck.
And we've been including that in our investor presentations. This is publicly available data through Enverus. And and what we also did was we took our data analytics division. We've completed 20,000 wells here in the U.S. in our existence. We went back and started creating cube analysis of these to look at what chemistries are used. And we started looking at the physicochemical properties of these various reservoirs between what type of water, what type of produced water, what the hydrocarbons look like, what the composition of the reservoir was. And what we found was that we could pretty much dial in by putting, if we got 5 properties from the E&P operator on where they were going to go, we can almost diagnose the chemistry digitally and start testing and get in there faster than running a month worth of testing. We can do it in about 2 days.
You remind me of Core Lab when you talk about that. You really do.
Yeah, and
you're changing it from an R&D exercise to a real-time operating exercise.
It's all about the DOE using the data that you've already had and moving that. So, and what we saw that happened in our operation was I had 6,000 SKUs of products. We're down to 250. And right now we're actually full-time and I would say 50 out of that 250 represent 80% of our spend. We turn chemicals like a grocery store now. Our turn rates are about 14. And so you look at, how do we manage capital to grow without putting any debt on the balance sheet and those pieces? We brought all these things in. I think that we're doing some things that are innovative, not only on the technology side, but how we look at diagnosis and the different components there.
Yeah, I think JP3 is a hidden gem. I don't know it's not hidden, but
and speaking of that too, I mean, you look at, we bought the technology with its strength in the midstream, and in terms of we can look at transmix applications, because typically you have an intermingling interface, and they'll let that interface flow for say 10 seconds, and it's costing $40,000 a second that they're letting that waste product go through. Then they know it's clean and they'll cut it off. We can monitor it and actually cut that down to 4 seconds. So 6 seconds at $40,000 a second is $250,000 every interchange that we save those companies, and we're doing that multiple times a day.
That's worth some money, huh?
That's worth a couple of bucks, yeah.
And so then we got to look at applications, and we worked with ProFrac. We want to we got all this stranded field gas, and we can actually monitor the BTU quality of gas in real time, take a measurement every 3 seconds. And so we were like, well, heck, if you got to protect this frac equipment and you want to run it off field gas and not run the high dollar CNG, we have a fuel skid that goes out there that we flow the field gas directly into it, and as soon as it sees a BTU spike, it has a dead man switch, diverts the flow to a blend down tank with CNG to bring the BTUs down. As soon as the slug goes through, it goes right back to field gas. The first 3-well pad that we had this thing on, we saved almost 1 million gallons of diesel from being burned, and we had a 92% conversion rate to field gas.
Wow.
Well, in the day of age of biofuel being increasingly and dramatically important to get to work, that's a goose's golden egg.
And for me, one of the holy grails that we're looking at is we've got this new new technology coming out. It's called our Gen 3 model that's in the field being tested right now, where one of the bottlenecks we had in JP3 on this acquisition was we had to get to large-scale manufacturing and better cost structures and really hone the device in. And so now we have one that we can actually leave at every wellhead. So why could that become important? Well, when you look at right now, for the resource owner and or the crude traders or the people that are buying on the back end, they take a composite analysis every 6 months, and they base what they pay on that one sample. And there's always these fluctuations. We can measure it every 3 seconds while it's flowing, and we give a pulse check versus that composite analysis over in real-time data lake over these months. And we've seen as much as 10 or 15% variance from what that composite is. So somebody's getting underpaid or overpaid by that.
Wow.
And so when you look at custody and chain of custody transfer, it could be a differentiator for doing that. And more importantly, right now, if you look at production chemistry, there's thousands of light duty trucks on the road. You and I talked about this. We can actually look at the compositional changes and water changes that are taking place at the production. We could diagnose chemistry without having to send somebody out to site, to do testing. And so
you're saying all the things that everybody's trying to accomplish, taking people, out of the field, optimize timing, more automation.
Because traveling on the road is dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And you look at emissions components and all the different pieces, cost.
Expensive, yeah.
And I'm not saying you won't have to have them go out there and do some testing every now and then when you detects a change. Sure. But a lot of things it would be able to diagnose the changes on a treater truck. So there's a lot of cool things that I think that we are bringing that are differentiated that, we've got to do a better job out in the public markets. And one of the things that the CFO, Bon Clement and I are doing, we're getting out and doing a lot of these non-deal road shows, conferences, and speaking to really bring some of the interesting things that we're doing back to the forefront here at Flotek.
I think it's great. I mean, I've had a history with Flotek, previous management, and there's some really neat intellectual property that was held in the business. I'm glad to see somebody like yourself that has the educational background to unlock some of that potential and add and build upon what was there, because I think there's some neat opportunities for the business. But I have to introduce you my buddy Christian Palmaz. He basically built the world's largest underground winery, and he's able to, if he were sitting here, we could be looking at his wine tanks via his iPad,
analyze the level of sulfites and
yeah, so just kind of like tending to a well, kind of similar to what you're talking about, real-time analysis. In theory, he can build the perfect bottle of wine because he's able to control temperature in 1-inch increments and barrels and dose the wine with antibiotics when necessary and whatever.
And we looked at it, right, in terms of the chemistry business. Look, you're always going to be battled in chemistry of you make a innovative change, it's instantly being pushed to commoditization. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we, from a strategic standpoint, needed was to bring some data component to that, right? And I call it it's the turbocharger for helping our chemistry sales, but more importantly, where the company wants to go as far as being a intellectually focused organization. JP3 is a great vehicle for what we're doing there. And we've had unfortunately, it got stalled a bit with COVID, right? It's hard to talk to people about some new, really nice technology if you have to do it on Zoom all the time. It's difficult.
It is.
But now we're really starting to make some good strides and pushes, and we're excited about it.
Well, I don't think people realize, after taking organic chemistry in college, the level of technology that chemistry is. Most people think if it doesn't have a chip to it, it can't really be technology. Well, they didn't take Dr. Jeske's organic chemistry class. I just think but you're right. The biggest problem is it gets commoditized quickly. Mm-hmm. Okay? And we've seen compressors and engines how commoditized can you be? Yet the biofuel capability, the constant monitoring for predictive maintenance capability, the automatic SCADA systems where I don't have to have a guy drive and check everything every day. That's where life is going to. The methane emissions, now I'll check it every month. And it's like, no, you'll have continuous monitoring, or could put you down, which has to be something that you look at. But everything's going to real-time data, and it doesn't matter what your product is, chemicals or sand or anything else.
100%. And I mean, even the way we do logistics is the same way, right? I mean, we've gone through a lot of automation components around how it was amazing. Like, again, I had an initial thought about how we're delivering chemistry in the field in terms of milk runs versus long hauls and different pieces like that. And then, we built some models for it. And I was like, you know what? As much as we spend on logistics a year, it'd be worth getting someone like a Deloitte or someone to come in here and let them analyze to see if we're right. Come in and look. And of course, they came in and took a look, and we were relatively spot on. But what the findings that we found were complete opposite of what I thought in terms of where we would buy and own our trucks versus where do we use third-party transfer. And so look, we learn something new every day, and this automation piece accelerates how fast we do it. And I think there's pros and cons to some of the stuff that's in AI. These what do they call them? Those ripple memory issues where it makes it learns something. A neural network can learn. It's only as good as the data that goes into it. It can make a wrong assumption if you've got wrong data.
Right.
We looked at doing some of that in our autonomous drilling things back in the past. We were putting bad mud data in there, and it gives bad projections. And so, in this case, we always had to be careful, cognizant of those. But I had a chemistry professor one time told me, he said, Ryan, doesn't matter. Too much of anything is too much. He said, so there's always that unique balance of how you look at things and the intuition and trust on how you run some of this technology. So pretty unique.
I have fond memories of one of my former organic chemistry professors. We used to make libations in the lab.
You had a much more creative professor than I did. I like that.
Dr. Barbara Booker. She was a lot of fun. But anyway. Well, I think it's fascinating to hear what you're doing at Flotek, and I think with JP3, the things y'all are doing, I think is going to put you in a enviable spot. You've had a fascinating start of your life. You've certainly got more years ahead, and I look forward to seeing you accomplish many things. But at this stage in your life, having experienced as much of you have, we typically like to ask our guests if they have anything that they have learned that they'd love to share with their younger self or friends and family. And don't know if you've got any words of wisdom you'd like to share with us.
I honestly, when I look at it, I start every now and then you got to kind of take a personal inventory a bit between your professional and your personal life, et cetera. And you start looking for these common themes you see along the way. And one thing my dad's always taught me along the way that has stuck with me, and I would tell anybody coming up, is my dad was no matter what I did when I was growing up, he'd look at me when we would be rapping. Some people like, "Did you finish it? Like, did you finish what you started, one way or the other?" Sometimes that is knowing when to fold them. Sometimes it's knowing when to push it through, but always have an awareness of where you are in these processes. Don't ever leave them hanging. Have some integrity about yourself, have some character about yourself, and finish the things that you start and execute, one way or the other. And be, and be accountable for those things. It's something that I would say I learned the way. And I read a book, a guy named Rob Regner. I used to do some leadership training with Rob. Bannett was my manager when I first came to Saudi. Rob's an awesome guy. And, he gave me, we talked about accountability, and he gave me, I used to put all my guys through Oz accountability training. Yeah. Where you look at Webster's definition of accountability versus it's an opportunity to take something on and make it better, right? And, those are things that really, push me, because I would say today, it doesn't matter what generation gap you go through, your personal life, professional life, etc. Character, integrity, and finish the things you start are cornerstones and foundational pillars that will never let you down if you stick to those.
Well put.
And I don't know, unfortunately, we've seen an evolution away from some of those things. in a multitude of facets, in the nuclear families, in stuff we see in business, and different components, whereas that's the blocking and tackling of success, in my opinion. The other things I would say is I mentioned it, staying humble and staying curious, because it doesn't matter how much you think you know about something. You're going to run across, it could be a new hire, but they may see something. It's like, I look at like kids will walk in and they'll say the damnedest things, and you're like, oh, and always be willing to listen to that one person that'll say those things and take it back and process it a bit. And then, the other thing that is like, staying competitive and never getting complacent. It's probably the most frustrating, thing about me that my wife hates the most is, and honestly, I've had to kind of address it a bit in my personal life, because I never was happy. It was like, put the straps on, pull to that finish line. And when I stepped across that finish line, I was taking those straps off, putting new ones on, looking for the next one.
Right.
And I think it's just because, as competitive athletes and the competitiveness you pick up along your career, you're always afraid if you're not going, somebody else is.
That's right.
And, and those are things that you've got to learn to temper appropriately at how you manage your time. Because I'm telling you, if you had 24 hours a day, a job will take 25 if you let it.
Yeah.
You got to figure out that balance. And so those are things I would tell, young people coming up that really, make a big difference. And most of those things, my dad and my mom, I was lucky, they taught me those things at a young age. And it's amazing, though, the evolutionary way you look at it through your careers. You get different experiences and different lenses and how they change. And, it's funny because a lot of guys that work with me now knew me when I was younger. And I don't want to say I was hot-headed, but I was temperamental when I was younger.
Volatile.
Yeah, volatile. And now they see things happen and they expect something from me, and I'm very, docile about it, because you said a really important thing earlier, Jim, is that, when you, in a big organization, there's always a layer. And now you are the layer. And every single person, everything you look at is under a microscope. If you get flustered, if you get upset, if you get that, because you don't realize that little rock ripple you drop in a pond, it could be causing a tidal wave on the other end. So being very composed and not getting shaken, or just a few tricks of the trade. But kind of preparing for this, I was hoping we would kind of talk about this, because I've stuck to, and I just thought it was important to say these things. Every chance I've had to run operations and run a team or anything, I've stuck to about 6 basic things every single time. And every time I take over a country, company, division, segment, we'd have a kickoff meeting. We'd do an audit to see the condition of the business.
Yeah.
And I would sit down and I would tell them that, number one, safety is always your first condition of employment. Don't care what you do. If you look at a safety-driven organization, typically you're going to find things that make it better financially, one way or the other.
Absolutely.
Culture,
and
yeah.
I stay focused on process execution, understanding what success looks like, doing those different pieces and executing there. And then we talked about open and respectful communication. There's nothing worse than being a team member and not knowing where you are, where you're going. So having that understanding of where you're supposed to be, how what you're doing aligns with the overall strategy of the company, and make sure that communication stays consistent. That's one thing I picked up from Jeff. Jeff was just like, man, when he's at Bayreuth, engineer fluid solutions, customize and maximize wellbore value. I mean, it was just like driven into us. I swear I probably got a tattoo on me somewhere with that on it, right? And
I think he said that on our podcast
He did.
too.
I mean, it's like, and I'll remember that the day I die, but that's consistency around that. And then I said, be innovative and be accountable. And then my last thing that I always tell everybody is finish what you start. And so I'll get off my soapbox about these things, right? But that's what I would tell my young self.
It's a great soapbox.
I would tell my young self those things.
I'm glad he stopped at 6, because I can't count past 10, And I can
Finish
remember
what you
those
start,
things.
though. That's an excellent one.
Yeah.
I got lucky and had a fabulous father as well, who was a brilliant and good man. He will always be my hero, and integrity in all things. be truthful in all things, and finish what you start. He said if you do those three things, life works.
I couldn't be in more alignment.
That's a good Mississippi boy coming to that too. If I figured that y'all were about 30 miles apart at most, your father and my father.
I would imagine,
at most, most of their young lives. So,
well, that was good stuff. I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, this has been awesome. I've got a massive amount of respect for both of you, and having the opportunity to come on here and just, talk about, career opportunities, talk about some great organizations, some great people. And I feel blessed all the time. I think the more you step back and look, I drive to work some mornings, I don't even turn the radio on anymore. I just sit there and I'll think about things or whatever it is, and you get more and more humble about them every day to say you've been in across the years, been in the presence of some really great individuals, and some great opportunities and some great cultures. And, I'll never forget I was in Saudi when they tore the Pearl Roundabout down, and Bahrain, and all you just go through these things, and it's just hours of storytelling. And, a bunch of my buddies like, you should write a book. I'm like, people will get tired of it after a bit, but it's just pretty, it's just amazing. And I'm so blessed to be able to do it. I really am.
Well, I would encourage you, as I have a number of friends, and this is something Jim and I were talking about the other day, is that people like the storytelling, and I would encourage you with your very fascinating life thus far, and it's certainly not going to be over anytime soon, to take the time to either write those memories down or record them into a recorder.
These days, just dictate them occasionally. This is, and just do individual stories. There was this time when we were in Singapore, and I remember, and just do those. Nobody's looking. Those are the stories that are entertaining and educational at the same time. And I've found myself doing it mainly because I write too much these days. But I'll be driving down the highway, and I'll just think of something that's a story I want to record. And I do, and sometimes it ends up in my weekly, and thank God most of the time it doesn't. But I'm keeping them all, and I'm going to give them to my kids. And my daughter just sent me a birthday video where she was recounting the most important things we have done, I have been to her life, and 90% of them were a surprise. I'm like, wow, that was that important to you? So I agree, that's what you should do. Tell these stories, record them, and save them for your kids when you're old.
And I'm glad to hear you guys say that's some good encouragement. And, I was talking to my father-in-law. He and I, my mother-in-law passed away this past summer, and so I call and talk to him quite a bit. And I was telling him, I have these major concerns around, challenges in our industry these days, because we've got to get out there and be more positive about the story about what we do in the energy sector, in terms of how much is going to be needed, and get the factual things. I think Alex Epstein does a great job out there talking, his energy talking points and those things. You got to get out there, and we've got to be telling that story consistently, truthfully, and with integrity around those pieces because, there's this constant cloud over what we do, and I don't think people fully understand. There's a few commercials that's been out now about what all this thing supplies, but if you like your dry fit clothes, if you like your makeup, if you like all these things come from hydrocarbons. And getting out there and telling that story, because the negative light on there gives us problems in the investment community, capital support, the lack of interest there, and more importantly, guys, what I'm more concerned about is the ability to recruit talent for the future.
That's the biggest issue.
And it's a pain point.
That's the biggest issue.
It is a concern, but every time I start to go dark and think about that, I meet some young person that's got their head screwed on straight, so it gives me a little bit of faith and confidence that they're not
that
all.
gap will bridge.
Yeah, but still not enough. And I think the other big issue too, and I've mentioned this now a couple of times publicly, that the industry's not done a very good job educating folks, but nor has the educational system done a very good job educating. And when you think about oil and gas, if that's what we're talking about, there is the transportation, fuel, and power generation capability of oil and gas in one bucket over here. And then you've got the petrochemistry and its derivatives and this other bucket over here.
Which is everything in our lives.
And nobody talks about that part
at all.
They want to talk about transportation and power. And I don't disagree that there's better ways to generate electricity, which is great. I think it's small modular nuclear reactor stuff, thorium stuff.
Yes.
Yep. There's still a place for natural gas, but think about where we came from. Mm-hmm. And I joked with somebody the other day. He said, like, oil and gas industry, we ought to put out a big billboard to say we saved the whales. People go, what are you talking about? I go, well, if you knew anything about history, you would know we basically wiped out the global population of whales so we could read at night.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people don't know that. They don't appreciate that. And so it's an evolution. And this sky is falling, catastrophizing position these people are taking. You really got to ask, do they really care, or is this just a way for them to line their pockets? And it's a way for them to line their pockets and get power, and it just disgusts me. But the petrochemistry part, like, we may find alternatives to power in fuel, although I don't really like those alternatives unless it's nuclear.
Burn more trees.
I don't want to be burn more trees. I don't necessarily want to be on a battery operated airplane. There's just something like that doesn't work. But you know, as it relates to petrochemistry stuff, I mean, it's in everything we do.
Mm-hmm.
Food, antibiotics, everything that makes life survivable and our ability to adapt. And it's mind-boggling to me how ignorant people have allowed themselves to become with their emotions, and, you know, very good but bad campaigns of information put out by these groups.
I watched a video the other day of a Senate hearing. I guess it was a congressional hearing, and a woman was advocating the end of plastics. And one of the congressmen started asking her, well, okay, what about your glasses? And she goes, well, what do you mean? Well, they're plastic. Well, what about your phone? Oh, it's glass. No, I'm talking about the internal components. And he would name something, and she'd go, oh, no, that's not what that is. And he goes, well, yes, it is. And it was everything she had on. And, of course, nobody watches congressional hearings, so, only weeds like me. So, but you know, I've always said we need to put our ads on the National Enquirer at the shopping center stands instead of page 3 of the Wall Street Journal.
Mm.
So,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And when I was in graduate school at Southern Miss, and you take your first intro year, all the organic chemistry, is it starts at crude.
Yes.
You'll say crude, and then write all your reactions out to get to where you want. And before you know it, you're at polyaramid fibers, which is what you make bulletproof vests out of.
Organic chemistry.
Or whatever,
I mean,
wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
And it starts right there every single time. And it's pretty amazing, right?
The most organic thing there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, this has been good. I hope this
Ron.
won't be our last conversation.
I hope not. You know, hopefully, I hope to keep, making a little bit of wave in the oil and gas and energy sectors for a bit. And I enjoy it every single day. You know, I every aspect about my job. I'm one of those guys that I like coming to work. I enjoy it a lot. And, I don't, whatever capacity that continues in. My wife told me, she said, I'd never retire. And she said, you would drive me crazy if you're at home. And she said, you'll probably be consulting or doing something, because my mind will drive me crazy. I'll be trying to figure out how to do something ridiculous on an engineering side if I'm not doing some kind of work.
Yeah.
Do you know Jeremy Thigpen?
That name sounds familiar.
I need to introduce you to Jeremy. You guys have so much in common, it's scary.
Yeah. We need to get Thigpen on here, too.
We'll get him on here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so
Ryan.
much. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us. Look forward to producing more conversations with great people and friends, and appreciate you listening.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Jim.
The Oilfield 360 podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: Lockton Global Energy and Marine, uncommonly independent. Lockton is the world's largest privately owned insurance broker and risk finance advisor. Lockton's global energy expertise is centered in Houston. and represents the largest concentration of energy specialists, clients, and experiential knowledge in the upstream, midstream, and downstream segments of the oil and gas industry. Visit lockedin.com for more information. Upright Digital. Upright Digital specializes in partnering with your business to maximize marketing efficiencies. We have a deep understanding of people, their needs, motivations, behaviors, as well as the technologies that enable brands in many industries to utilize what is available in a changing digital landscape. Find us online at uprightdigital.com.